Welcome back to another Those Twisted Pines reading, dear researchers. Today we're going to be continuing Burnt Bridges with Meeting Over Coffee by Jacob Conwell. Now without further ado, Meeting Over Coffee. Daniel Navarro sat alone at a secluded table in a coffeehouse in Portland. Rather than the usual attire he wore while acting as an agent of the Foundation, here he sat in a set of street clothes. Spread out on the table before him were a series of 11 notes. The clock has struck 1. Daniel, JTH. The clock has struck 2. JTH. Tick-tock, we're now at 3. JTH. The bell tolls 4. JTH. Time is running out, Daniel. The clock strikes 5. JTH. Halfway there, the clock strikes 6. JTH. The hour is 7, Daniel. JTH. The pendulum swings, and now it is 8. JTH. Time grows short, the 9th hour is at hand. JTH. Are you frightened, Daniel? The clock strikes 10. JTH. Hour 11. See you soon. JTH. Each one had been found at the last 11 Anart sites Navarro had been assigned to. While he was not one to scare easily, Navarro would be lying if he said he wasn't feeling slightly uneasy. Whoever JTH was, it now appeared they were making good on their promise from Belarus. They were coming to see him soon. Navarro quietly folded up the notes and placed them in his jacket pocket. He then took a sip of coffee as he rubbed his temple and waited for his guest to arrive. A short while later, she did. Navarro waved to her as she found her way to the back of the coffeehouse. She was a tall, pale woman in her mid-30s with short black hair, dressed in a black rain jacket. Without a word, she approached, choosing to stand by the table rather than take a seat. For a moment, the two stared at each other, waiting for each other to speak. You know, Navarro broke the silence. I was half expecting you to not show up. Please, take a seat. Do you want anything to drink? The woman shook her head as she sat down. I figured that if I didn't make an appearance here, you'd take it upon yourself to visit me at home or work, she replied. You got me there, Navarro said with a shrug. How are you, Jill? Still teaching at that high school? The school was closed down in 2008, Jill said. I've been working at a graphic design firm since. The table fell silent. Jill simply stared at Navarro, her eyes a mixture of anger and sadness. I suppose I should get to business then, Navarro sighed. That would be appreciated, returned Jill. Navarro then pulled a file out of his pack and slid it across the table, allowing Jill to open it before he spoke. My sources tell me you're still involved in the Portland Anart scene from time to time. I was hoping you could point me in the direction of a particular artist. They've been making animated lawn gnomes. Normally they're harmless enough, stealing bits and bobs from sheds, moving things around at night, so on and so forth. However, recently a group of 10 of them pummeled a local teenager unconscious and stole, among other things, his shoes. Navarro chuckled slightly before taking another sip of his coffee. Naturally, my employers sent me in to see who is making them, and get things to cool down a bit. Jill closed the file and slid it across the table, folding her arms as she shook her head. Sorry, can't help you out. I see. Navarro replied, setting his now empty mug down on the table. Well then, would you know someone who would know? No, Jill countered. Oh, of course not, Navarro sighed. I'm sorry for bothering you then. He then placed the file back in his bag, a small smile on his face as he stood up. If you're still married to Tom, please tell him I said hi, said Navarro. I saw that sculpture of his at the Portland Art Museum. It looks nice. Jill shook her head in response. How do you sleep at night? Preferably on a bed, Navarro replied. But I'm sure that's not the answer you wanted.
When we heard you were nabbed by the suits, we thought you were dead, Jill hissed. I don't know about your friends in other cities, but we held a fucking funeral here. Myself, Tom, Eric, Jackson, Alexis, hell, even Jericho was there.
Navarro opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't get the words out before Jill unleashed another wave.
Now imagine how we felt 2 years later when we heard not only that you were alive, but were working for the suits and leading a raid on the Baker's Seattle studio. How could you? Of all people, how could you work for them?
Jill's hands were now closed into tight fists, the intensity of her glare enough to burn a hole through steel.
And on top of it, you think you can just roll in here after all this time as if nothing has happened and ask me to help you?
Navarro sighed and returned to his seat. For several moments, he remained silent. Jill, you remember me for a second? He began. How many artists do you personally know? No names, just give me a number.
What does that have to do with...
She began, her expression now one of confusion. Just a number, Jill. Navarro interrupted.
11.
Right, and I bet for the most part they are harmless, relatively normal people who picked up art the same way someone picks up other hobbies, like you and your sketches, said Navarro. For the most part, they don't want to prove some point about society or harm people. But there are artists out there who are like that, and the suits, as you call them, they aren't in the habit of taking too much time to do the delicate task of determining the difference.
Navarro then reached back to his pack and pulled out the file and sliding it back across the desk.
That's where I come in, Navarro continued. That's why I go to people like you to find out who artists like whoever made these gnomes are. Because if I don't find them first, another agent will, and I can almost guarantee they will probably not do as good of a job as I do of keeping things civil. Unlike me, they haven't been on both sides of this. Yeah, maybe how I handled the uniform change wasn't the best way to go about things. But I do what I do to keep people like you out of the crossfire.
Jill fell silent as Navarro placed the file back into his pack. He then pulled out a box and placed it on the table.
By the way, I almost forgot to give you this.
Jill opened it to find a small metal picture frame. Inside was a colored pencil sketch of a blue sailing ship at sea, the image moving over the waves on the paper. On occasion, a bank of fog would appear and then vanish, taking the ship with it. The ship would reappear at the center of the image a few moments later. In the bottom corner, she could see her initials.
I stumbled across that in a raid on the East Coast,
Navarro said as he placed his pack back on his shoulders.
Since my employers were just going to place it in low-priority storage until the end of time, I felt maybe it would be best if it just vanished one day and was returned to you.
Jill covered her hand over her mouth as she looked down at the picture and slowly nodded a thank you. If I give you a name, will you promise they won't be hurt? She then asked.
I promise, Navarro replied.
And you'll leave. Tom, Jackson, Alexis, and me. We'll never see you again.
If that's what you want.
Jill then quietly grabbed a napkin and quickly wrote down a name and address. She then folded the napkin up and handed it to Navarro.
Thank you very much,
said Navarro as he pocketed the information. Jill nodded and quietly placed the lid back on the box.
Have a nice life, Jill.
Without another word, Navarro stepped out of the coffee house and into the rainy Portland night. Navarro traveled on foot for quite some time, gathering his thoughts as he made his way across the damp cityscape. As he stepped across an alley, he felt a sharp pain in the back of his neck, as if he was bitten by a bug. Quickly, he slapped at his assailant, only to find a piece of paper. Navarro slowly read it to himself. The clock strikes 12. Hello, Daniel. Navarro then glanced down the alley. There he saw a tall figure in a dark coat, a hat pulled low over their face, obscuring all view. Navarro watched as his vision then blurred and his legs gave out from underneath him. He could see the figure begin to make its way down the alley towards him. Well, shit, Navarro mumbled as he finally blacked out. And that's where we'll end it here today, dear researchers. Thank you very much for coming. I hope to see you all next time. And make sure to get yourself something to drink. And don't have someone stalking you in the dead of night, though it's unlikely that happens. Good luck out there. Goodbye. Have fun.